Hey everybody, it's Scott from Heroic Studios Gaming again, coming at you with another video talking about stuff. Welcome to the April version of Scott's Book Corner. That's what we're going to talk. We're going to be talking about a book today. This is one of the many videos of this month. I just have a bunch of videos this month for some reason. A couple of extras. That's fine. If you're paying attention, you'll notice. But anyway, let's talk about books. This is a little out of order, as you may well know, because normally this is the first video I make, and instead I made a video game video, and then I also made another video. So this is like the third video in the series. That's fine. But anyway, let's talk about it. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about a book series that I read a little bit more recently, but also during the time that I was actually trying to write stuff for Maximum Apocalypse, so it had some foundational things. So we're back to talking about a foundational series. This is a series of books by RE Mcdermitt called, they're the Disruption series is what it's called. So it's under a Telltale Sky, Pushback, and then Promises to Keep. I got the whole series as just like this one, a trilogy on Audible, because somebody recommended it to me, and so I was like, all right, cool, I'll check it out. And so then I started listening to it, and then I got through a lot of it that way. I didn't actually ever own the physical books, hence this little image I'm showing you now. I do a lot of audiobooks, so that's not actually that surprising that was the case. But it is a series that follows a bunch of people who are doing a bunch of stuff to try to survive this sort of disruption. That is what the core of the thing is about. Let's see. I think it's I don't want to go into all of their names. It's not super important, but essentially there's this group of survivors that are there's this group of there's light coming on in my face. There's a group of survivors. I was just trying to bring in my notes, but apparently that didn't help. There we go. So there's a group of survivors that happen. So there's this storm. Let's start at the beginning. There's a storm that sort of rolls into the United States and ends up destroying the power grid, shutting it down through, I guess the whole of the United States, but the stories follow this couple of people on sort of the eastern seaboard that then kind of go a little bit more south and move into the Appalachian territories. But it's mostly the East Coast. And they originally, it doesn't involve anyone tremendously important, just a couple of ship people, it's a couple of ship people and some National Guardsmen. And they're trying to survive, and they're just trying to live out their normal life. Some of there's a character who's ex-military. A couple of them are ex-military. A couple of them are active military. A couple of them are National Guard. And it's this story about the super collapse and the fast collapse of society after power gets shut off. It is a thing that introduced me to the idea that that grocery stores only have about a week's worth of food in them, which is something I kind of didn't know. I kind of hadn't I kind of knew, but I didn't have it spelled out quite so dramatically as the story sort of lets on, and the importance of shipping lines and freight lines and stuff. So the main one of the main things in the story is that there's all these boats that want to come into dock and refuel and stuff, and they're tankers and they're full of supplies. They've got tons and tons of supplies, and there's a lot of these supplies that are sitting in crates at docks that are just waiting to be taken and used, but only some of the characters are smart enough to figure that out, and then it isn't until the gangsters start realizing that these characters are well supplied that they go, hey, maybe we should try to look into that, and then it creates this whole thing where it starts to spiral out of control. The major problem with the story is there's kind of a major problem. So there's a couple of major problems with the story. One of them is pacing. The book does a lot of we're going to be doing this thing for a while where we're all just kind of trying to figure out what to do, and we're going to go back and forth, and we're just going to kind of keep okay, we're going to go on this long drawn out story about a supply run, and then all of a sudden we're going to jump several months, and then we're going to be doing a thing. It's just not very well organized. So it's kind of boring in some parts of it. So you're just kind of okay, we've spent a really long time telling me that the ship is turned sideways facing the one way so that other ships can't come by the other way, and I get it. All of these boats have two motors. They have the normal speed motor and then the trawler motor. I get it. So it's kind of a thing, or how long it goes on to explain about the Appalachian Trail, the length of the Appalachian Trail, and how you can walk the Appalachian Trail, and you can go all the way from Maine down to Kentucky and Georgia and stuff. And it's okay, I get it. So there was just some business there. But the one thing that this book does try to do that was the most annoying was like this sort of weird conspiracy with this group of, I guess, mercenaries. It's sort of forced into these sort of. So the government decides that it's got into such a rough situation that they need to form another agency. Like they're going to, like the Department of Homeland Security is essentially null and void, and they're going to form this other agency that has like all of these martial law powers so that they can get things back in order. And the problem with it is that the martial law powers are not in the hands of the president; they're in the hands of the leader of that organization, and that leader of that organization is somebody who's been basically spending all of their time overseas, essentially being a warlord mercenary. And this group is made up of not just current active soldiers, which are sort of conscripted into this new organization that are told that they're going to get, like, at least they'll get fed and stuff, and then they're stuck in it for life. They can never leave this organization, period. They never get to go back to their original units. This is their new unit now. And it's like, so that's a thing apparently. And then not just that, but then mixed into that group are also like ex-military militia people or ex-military private contractors who are also being pulled into that. So this organization is like made up of private contractors and then active military people. And so it turns in this really weird situation where there's apparently a group of soldiers that are following orders because they think that they're the orders from the U.S. government, but they're actually being led by a mercenary commander, private military contractor commander who was actually like basically dishonorably discharged from the military because he was essentially evil and a warlord, and somehow that's the person in charge. And so like it's like this weird like conspiracy of like let's make the good guys like regular people who are just trying to like survive and have like these really brilliant ideas and know how to handle themselves, and then let's make the bad guys like really bad, like people who will just go ahead and murder babies to steal their food. Like it's a very much of a weird situation, especially considering that group is supposed to be the group that was set up by the government. And then it's like, oh, well, but the people who set them up were evil as well. And so they just took advantage of the situation and they wanted to be able to be the kings of the world by hoarding all of the fuel supply and all of the food and stuff like that. And so if you don't comply, they're going to kick open your door, steal all your food, and then burn down your house. It's a very weird series of stories. There's some good bits in there. There's some good bits about like water purification and using like various different ways of doing that and surviving in a situation where you don't have power anymore. And some skills that maybe people need to learn how to have, like skills that you might learn if you ever took like outdoorsman classes or something. Or in like in my case, like things I learned when I was going through the scout program as a younger scout. This kind of stuff. And so it's interesting in that way, but like the overarching story plot with the various like factions was really boring. The most interesting like situation of factions involved the escaped prisoners, in my opinion. There's a section of escaped prisoners who like eventually realize that like help is not coming, like no one is coming, and the guards are essentially abandoning the place because there's not food. And so they're all starving, so they eventually figure out how to break out, and they break out. And they take control of the prison, and then they have access to like weapons and stuff, and then they then go from there, and they make that their base of operations, which is like pretty smart. There's some bit about different prisoners and the different factions inside of a prison. So like the gangs that aren't part of like the main faction that wins ended up like getting killed because starved to death because the faction doesn't want to help them. So there you have prisoners inside the prison that they just starve to death. It's kind of bad. But anyway, those guys are supposed to be evil as well, and that makes sense. And so then these guys break. So then they go from there. They have a base of operations. They then spread out, and they start, working their way to, like, local police agencies and then, like, sheriffs. And so they're sheriffs in disguise. But fortunately, our protagonists can definitely tell somebody who's not wearing a police uniform very well and has really bad gun discipline and really bad radio discipline. And so they catch on pretty fast that these guys are not really cops and don't follow what they say, and then are able to stage a response to that. So that whole bit and like the river war and stuff that happened in it, that was pretty damn cool. So there is some bits of the story that were interesting, but there's a lot of it that like sort of drags out and is really kind of confusing. And it's like, I don't know. I think that like, oh, you're in it for life, and if you abandon it, then you're also considered a traitor to the United States government, and you can't go home because they'll just arrest you. I'm like, who will arrest you? Who? like these other corrupt evil people, like or the prisoners pretending to be county sheriffs. Like, who is going to arrest somebody for going AWOL? And that is kind of addressed a little bit. Like one of the bad guys in that particular group decides to kind of go AWOL and actually turns into a good guy and saves a family and all this other stuff. So like that's kind of addressed in the story, that like that fear of being listed as AWOL and dishonorably discharged is apparently a fear that will keep people stuck in the evil thing. And so it sort of feels like it's RE Mcdermitt's commentary a bit on sort of military situations, but at the same time, like almost all of the characters, or almost all of, no, I'm sorry, a lot of the major characters have some kind of military background or like National Guard thing. So it's like a weird situation where like the good guys have a military background and the bad guys also have a military background. So I'm not actually sure where RE Mcdermitt's stance on that particular subject is. It's a little confusing. But anyway, I would say that I would give this series essentially 1 thumb from me. Only because it kind of gets long in various points where it doesn't necessarily need to be as long. I'm currently working through the Alex Fletcher series because, again, that was another thing that was recommended to me. And the Alex Fletcher series is like a pandemic response thing from like 2010 to like 2014 or whatever the books were written. And that one is worse. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, well, at least when at the time RE Mcdermitt's story, I thought there was parts that were really way too long and needed to like, okay, just move along. We can move ahead. We don't need to get a whole rundown on how the river flows and how it bends and turns and like intimate details about the brush on the side of the Appalachian Trail and stuff like that. Like, I don't need any of that. I'm okay, Tolkien, like, calm down. But now I'm doing this other series and I'm like just like banging my head against the desk being like, okay, we're on chapter 40 now and he's just now starting to like leave his house, which I guess is a reflection of like 2020 like COVID-19 response stuff from people. But at the same time, this was written 10 years before the COVID thing, so it's like, I don't know. This is kind of that, like, it doesn't make sense that this book, which is supposed to be a story, is paced so slowly. And so I will actually, grant that I probably would have given RE Mcdermitt a worse review had I not encountered a worse series of novels as far as pacing goes. But otherwise, I'm still going to give it a thumb from me. At least gets 1 thumb from me, because like I said, there were some pretty damn cool parts and some characters that were really interesting to have encountered. I don't know. I guess like I sort of feel like if I were the editor on this particular series, I probably would have been like, hey, why don't you focus on these particular pieces of the story because they're way more interesting than these other pieces of the story. You could move ahead with some of this bit. Some of the stuff that was in book 3, you probably could have pulled in book 2 and like just sort of shortened it down. And so I think it probably could have been better as a 2-book series instead of a 3 with some editing chop outs. But it's not a waste of time. Well, for sure, but you'd have to just realize that if you do take my recommendation and go read it, just be aware that I'm also sort of throwing out there that you have to be ready for being in it for the long haul. Like, you have to have some patience. Trust me, there's some rewarding bits, but there's a lot of non-rewarding bits. There's also some confusing characters that have very similar names or are apparently, I guess, related to other characters, but we don't really get that information for a while. And then even then it's like, it's brought up, but then it's kind of not. So we get like this thing where there's two or three people with very similar names because they're like, well, 2 of them are related to each other. And then one of them is just got a very similar name to another character. And it's like, sometimes it gets a little confusing. So just be aware that there's some confusing bits, and there's some very much like you have to have some stamina and reading kind of bits. But otherwise, that's it for me. That's a very 15 minutes. That's probably fair. All right, so that's it. So go ahead and and read this if you want to or not. But just know that it does have some neat tricks in there. Like if you didn't know how to purify water without like a water purifier or running water or power, like you can boil it. There's some things in there about like ways to do it on the fly on the super fast. So, cool. That's it. That's all I'll give you guys, and I will talk to you all later.